You ate way too much food yesterday. You slept fine but woke up in the middle of the night with that feeling in your stomach. You know it's coming. You got up, walked a few steps, and closed the door, and it's handled. Convenient, right? But have you ever wondered how ancient humans dealt with it? Let's start with the actual problem. A hunter gatherer band was somewhere around 15 to 50 people living in one camp with no separate rooms and no privacy whatsoever. Every one of those people needs to go several times a day. It's a lot of waste being produced in a very small area by a group that also has to drink from the water source nearby, sleep on that same ground, and eat food together. Get this wrong, and you don't just have an unpleasant camp, you have parasites, dysentery, and a group of people who start dying for reasons nobody knows. So here's the first rule. You walk away, not a few steps, but far enough that the camp is behind you and out of sight. Anthropologists have documented many humans living this way and have consistently described a designated area to relieve oneself and typically well away from the water source. That last part is the one that actually mattered. Water was the thing that could kill everybody at once. So the rule wasn't really about smell or embarrassment, it was about keeping waste and drinking water as far apart as possible, and every group that survived long enough to teach the next generation was a group that got that part right. The second rule is the most important thing in this entire story. They leave the camp. A hunter-gatherer camp isn't permanent. Groups move, sometimes every few weeks, following food and water and seasons, and when they moved, they left the entire waste behind them. The ground had months or years to break everything down naturally before anyone returned. There was no growing mess, no waste overflow. The sanitation system wasn't a thing at that time, It was simply the fact that nobody stayed long enough for it to become a waste crisis. Now think about that for a second. You probably picture ancient humans as living in filth. In reality, a group in a fresh camp was living somewhere cleaner than most cities would be. They weren't cleaner because they knew more. They were cleaner because they kept walking away from the mess. The third rule is social. Everybody pretended not to notice. There's a concept anthropologists observe about where privacy in these groups came from behavior rather than physical barriers. You can't build a wall, so you build a rule instead. When someone gets up and walks out past the fire, nobody follows. Nobody watches. Nobody talks about it. It's the same instinct you use in a public restroom today. Everyone knows exactly what's happening, but pretend they can't. That's not modern politeness. That's a very old piece of social norm, and it exists because in a group where you cannot physically get away from each other, you have to agree to look away. Now, what about the kids? Because a 2-year-old does not understand any of this. The honest answer is we don't know for sure. Small children didn't have much control over it exactly like they do now, and the adults looking after them dealt with it. And as soon as a kid was old enough to walk and understand, they learned the rules the same way they learned everything else, by watching adults and being corrected. Nobody sat down and explained sanitation rules. You just noticed that everyone walks that direction and never that direction, and you follow it as well. But what about when someone in camp is sick? A person with a bad stomach illness can't walk 200 meters, and now the thing that made everyone else safe stops working. We don't have direct evidence of how ancient humans handled that, but we do know two things. Sick people in these societies were taken care of, not abandoned, and the archaeological evidence is full of individuals who survived injuries and illnesses that would have made them helpless for weeks. And we know that if a group got this wrong badly enough, they didn't survive very long. So you are probably thinking, what does the actual evidence look like? Archaeologists study preserved ancient human waste, and it's genuinely one of the most valuable things they can find. It tells you what ancient humans ate, what plants grew nearby, what season it was, and critically, what parasites they were carrying. Some of the oldest examples have been recovered from dry caves in North America and have shown that humans were living there earlier than what archaeologists assumed. Some people's whole careers exist around studying this material, which is funnier than it should be, and also completely serious science. And the parasite record is really interesting. When you compare mobile hunter-gatherer populations to early farming communities, the parasite and gut infection loads go up dramatically once people settle down. They were still the same species with the same biology and the same basic hygiene condition. What changed was that people stopped leaving. Once you have a permanent settlement, you have a problem your ancestors never had to deal with. The waste and the people stay. Animals are now living alongside you, which introduces zoonotic diseases that can transfer from animals to humans. Water sources near settlements get easily contaminated because people have to use the same water over and over again. The population is denser, so anything infectious spreads faster and further. Agriculture gave humans a dependable food source, but in exchange, a sanitation crisis that took thousands of years to properly manage. Archaeological records show that humans solved it slowly, one invention at a time. Cesspits appear, which are essentially holes dug specifically to contain waste in one place. Some Neolithic settlements show evidence of simple drainage channels designed to carry water away from homes. In the Indus Valley, cities had remarkably organized drainage systems running along streets with waste carried away from where people lived. Later, Roman cities took it further and built large sewer systems as well as public latrines, some of which drains continuously into nearby rivers. Every one of these is based on the same principle our ancestors had, just engineered: get waste away from where people live and keep it out of the water. But here's the uncomfortable part. For most of the history of cities, we were worse at this than the people who came before us. A hunter-gatherer walked 200 meters and moved camp next season. A person in a dense medieval city threw waste into a street that never got cleaned, drank from a well contaminated by a cesspit 20 feet away, and lived surrounded by more people than any human had ever lived near before. Outbreaks of diseases like typhoid and later cholera in growing cities weren't a failure of ancient knowledge. They were what happened when we abandoned the one strategy that had always worked, which was leaving, and didn't replace it with anything good enough for a very long time. But then, the fix was enormous. Sewer networks, clean drinking water, and the realization that those diseases spread through contaminated water and germs rather than bad air. That single insight is one of the largest saves of human life in history, and it's essentially a very expensive, very complicated version of a rule a hunter-gatherer band already knew: keep the waste away from the water sources. So how did ancient humans actually deal with their own waste? They walked away from camp, they stayed away from the water, they agreed not to watch each other, and then, before anything could build up, they picked up everything they owned and moved somewhere else. It wasn't primitive. It was the only system that has ever worked without any technology, and it worked for hundreds of thousands of years of their lives. We didn't outsmart it. We built cities and made the problem far worse than it had ever been, and then spent thousands of years and an enormous amount of engineering to get back to roughly the same outcome our ancestors got by walking 200 meters.